Hello, and welcome to I Remember When, sponsored by the Gresham Historical Society. I'm Gwenda McCall. This evening's guest is going to tell us about her mother's beauty parlor and her father's grocery store that were both located on Northeast Roberts, and they were during the early 30s. I'd like you to meet Gertrude Van Horn. Gertie, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really intrigued by these old-fashioned beauty techniques, so let's go ahead and start talking about your mother's beauty parlor.
All right.
We have a picture here of Hester Ward that was taken in the 30s. Tell us a little bit about her beauty shop.
Well, it was in my father's building. There was a little office, sort of an office building to one side, and that was her beauty shop. And she called it the Iris Beauty Salon because she had a row of iris blooming right along the side of the building on one side. So she called it the Iris Beauty Salon. And she was the only operator.
Did they have very many chairs in there, or very many
she
dryers?
had like 2 chairs. She was the only operator, but she had 2 chairs. And then she had 3 dryers. And she was busy all the time.
Really? Did they do much hair coloring during the 30s?
No, I don't believe that they did. That was a thing of the future.
But what about permanent waves? They did do permanent waves.
Yes, she gave permanent waves. Then they were so cheap that everybody had to have a permanent wave. Then you didn't have to worry about putting your hair up in curlers and on rollers like we do now.
Now, how did they do the permanence in those days?
Well, she would roll the hair up in little sections, and all over your head, and it was heavy. You know, first thing, your head would be going every direction. And then this machine she would push out, and it had a lot of spring wires hanging down.
It looked like an octopus, I've heard.
Just about. And then on each end of one of these wires that came down was a clamp, and she would clamp that over the curler that was on your head. So you would have all of these things, maybe 36 of them hanging down. And then when she turned the electricity on, that depended on how long, how curly you wanted your hair. You know, sometimes it was 10 minutes, sometimes 15 minutes. And then I had to come along with a little hand dryer because the lady would say, oh, it's hot over here, and I'd have to cool it off. And then she'd say, oh, it's hot over here, and I'd have to run around and turn the cooler or the blower on this side to cool it off. And then she was hot up here. And that went on for 15 minutes. I think they were more afraid than they were hot. But anyway, in order to, so they wouldn't get burned.
It'd be pretty scary to be hooked up.
Because you could get a blister if it was, you know, if it was too close to your neck. And they did, the hair, you know, they curl it way down on your neck.
Now, did she do manicures and things like that, too?
No, manicures were out. They didn't have manicures.
Did people wear...
She had to take that in her beauty course.
Oh, did she?
But they didn't give she didn't give manicures.
Did people wear nail polish?
I don't remember that they had nail polish. I know that I didn't ever see her with it on.
But they did buff their nails, didn't they?
I think that that's how they got them shiny and nice looking.
I brought a buffer that was my grandmother's just to share, mostly because children don't know what a buffer is if you can't use polish. You know, they have never heard of it. And it has a chamois over it that comes off with this wire and little wooden handle, and just buff, and you really can buff your nails to a shine. It looks just as good as clear fingernail polish. So that was my grandmother's. What about the shampoo? What kind of shampoo did she use?
Well, she would get quite a large, well, I think it was about a 5-pound bar of pure Castile soap. And then I had a grater, like you'd grate carrots. And I would take that bar of soap and grate it off and put it in a gallon jug and fill the jug with hot water. And then put it back in the little cove. And whenever we needed shampoo, I'd run and get the jug and pour it out into the shampoo cup.
Was it pretty thick then with the melted soap in it?
Well, you had it thin enough. We knew just about how much soap to put in it to get the right texture.
And the hairstyles. Tell me about the hairstyles during the early 30s.
Well, I know the way I wore my hair was short always, and she would brush it forward, comb it forward, and then she'd put soap on it, and I'd have split curls all the way up the side.
Then you'd leave the soap on it?
Oh, sure. Then you didn't have to worry about putting soap on your face when you washed it.
So they'd be kind of glued to the
They'd
side
be
of your...
stuck, and they'd be hard. When it dried, they got hard.
So spit curls weren't really done with spit, they were done with soap.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, I didn't know that. And the word Marcel comes to mind, too. That was a special type of hairdo that they had then? How?
Well, they did that with an iron.
One like this?
Yes,
This looks just like the one I use, except there's no electric cord hanging from it.
Well, they didn't have an electric cord either. They had a little, looked like a toaster, and it had 2 holes where you would stick those 2 things in it and get it hot. And then you start in at the top, up here on the top of your hair, and imprint it, you know, and make it go one way, and then you put it back in and heat it up again, put it back in, and then you make your hair go the other way, and that's how you got the waves that went like that.
So they were really more like finger waves.
That's right.
We have a picture here that was loaned to us by Jean Elkington, who was one of our former guests. And this is Jean with her Marcel, and she was very proud of that, she told me.
You know, you'd start right at the top with your first wave, and you would indent it. And then you'd have to heat your iron up again and go into the next one, and then she would go backwards with one, and then you come forward, and you do that all the way down to the bottom. It took a long time.
I bet.
To
I was
give a
just
Marcel.
thinking. I bet it took a long time. My mother was in grade school about this time, and she had long curls. You remember the girls with the long curls that hung way down to their waists. And she tells me that my grandma would pin her hair up in rags, wrap her hair in rags. And what they did was they'd take strips of old sheet, and her hair would be clean and wet, and they'd hold this long strip of sheet up at the top, and then my mother would hold it, and then Grandma would wrap this hair around and around and around and around this long sheet. And then she'd take the 2 ends of the sheet and bring them up and tie it tight. So my mother had this little knot. And when she let it down the next morning, it would just fall in a ringlet all the way down.
I don't remember anything like that because my hair was always short, and I never put it up on anything. When your mother's a beauty operator, why should I do it myself?
You wouldn't have to have your hair in rags with your mother's a beauty operator.
Or wear rollers, which they didn't have in those days.
Oh, gosh.
Everything was pin curls.
Pin curls with little bobby pins.
Right.
Same bobby pins.
No, they used hairpins.
Oh, hairpins.
And they'd roll it around their finger and push it down. They'd put 2 hairpins in it.
So bobby pins weren't in yet?
Well, they were in, but you put it in with the hairpins.
What about the prices that your mother charged?
Permanents were $2.50.
$2.50.
And you could get a shampoo and a set for 50 cents.
Is that right?
75 cents if you had maybe long hair, quite long hair, and it took her a little longer to put it up.
How often did people have their hair washed? How?
Well, in those days, nearly every lady made their appointment like only 2 weeks in advance, or 2 weeks in advance.
So they only wash their hair about once every 2 weeks?
Right.
Isn't that funny? Because now so many of us wash our hair every day. I was reading in a 1906 book, and this lady was saying that you should wash your hair once a month. And my goodness, wouldn't my 11-year-old son love that? He only has to do his hair once a month.
And they didn't brush their hair a lot either.
Oh, they didn't?
No. You would brush it. If you had like straight hair, you could brush it all the time. But if you had curly hair, you didn't brush your hair very often. That way you kept the curl in longer.
So the 100 strokes a knife with the natural bristle, 100 strokes a night with the natural bristle brush.
That would be all right for someone with straight hair. But if you had curly hair, you didn't want to do that because that would take the curl out.
Sure.
These permanents used to last 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And that
they really cooked them in there, didn't they?
Well, if you leave the heat on your head for 15 minutes, you're going to have something, you know, a long curl.
Did you help your mother in other ways in the beauty parlor?
Right. She would maybe use 7 or 8 towels giving a permanent. And she couldn't afford to send the towels to the laundry. So we lived in this big house right next door. And we had all kinds of clotheslines in the back. And I did the laundry. Washed all of her towels and dried them outside for a penny apiece.
A penny apiece.
Right. And folded them. And took them back and put them away for her.
Did she have a good deal, a penny apiece, or was?
Oh, I should think so.
Okay, because I don't know. Money went so much
100 towels
farther.
would be only $1.
Well, that's a good point.
You know, my dad was buying the soap
and the hot water
and the water and everything.
That's funny. Did you find that there was a lot of advantages to having your mother own a beauty parlor?
Well, I had my hair always look nice.
Oh.
That was one consolation.
Let's show a picture of you in high school. Your hair does look lovely.
It was quite short then.
Gertrude Ward in high school. Yes. Did your mother have to have much schooling to learn how to be a beautician?
No, she, in those days, 6 months.
6 months was all?
6 months, and then she rode the Gresham bus back and forth to Portland every day.
Not the trolley, but
no,
the bus.
They had a trolley, but it was at the other end of town, and the bus went right by our house.
Oh, so that was more convenient.
It was really more convenient.
You told me a story about a hank of hair that was on a board that she had. Go ahead and tell us the story.
Well, there was a board that she got at beauty college, and it had, the hair was nailed. Human hair was nailed right across the top, and then all of this hair hung down. And that's what she practiced with. She would take her Marcel curling irons, and she would practice on those, and then she would practice her finger waves and her hairpins and roller permanents. And she had that board of hair for years. And in fact, I used to try to practice on it.
Oh my.
Years after she was an operator.
Did it get pretty tired after a while?
I think it probably did. I don't remember whatever happened to it. But.
And I was trying to remember if there were any other old beauty techniques that from our family, and I can distinctly remember my grandma making lemonade. And she'd have a half a lemon, and she'd squeeze out the lemon juice, and then she'd take the half a lemon and put it on her elbows. And I guess it was to bleach her elbows so they stayed nice and light and young looking.
I don't remember doing that.
Well, I can remember that. And then another thing that I used to do in high school was rinse my hair in vinegar to make sure we got the soap out, right?
I remember doing that.
We have some photos here of your parents' store, both their stores. They were right next to each other.
Yes.
All three of these. Now, this one is your mom's shop.
Yes.
And here are your dad and yourself in front of the shop. And then your future husband and your dad in front of the grocery store. So see, the grocery store is on the right and the beauty shop was right on the left. And why don't you tell us about the location of these buildings, this building? Well,
this building is now where the YWCA is, down on 2nd and Roberts, across from Hicks's.
Okay.
And my dad built the building in 1932, and it is a two-story building, and we lived up over the store. That we didn't move over the store until, I would say maybe 5 or 6 years after he built the building, and then he finished the upstairs.
Was it a good location?
Well, then it wasn't a good location.
Why?
Because there wasn't anything else on Roberts, on North Roberts.
Well, it was all homes.
No, there wasn't anything up there. Well,
Nothing?
there were a few homes, but the streets were just ruts, just hardly anything there. And everyone said, well, he'll never make a go of it because the town is going to go west.
Oh, and here Gresham's all spread out. It went all directions.
It went every way.
So he was right.
But he was the first one to build anything on, to build a business on North Roberts.
And what did he call the grocery store?
It was Ward's Cash Store.
I was reading in the 1933 Outlook where he completed the building, 2 shops and the living quarters up above for how much money?
Well, I think it said $8,000, didn't it?
Isn't that something? Boy, you can't do that nowadays. Did you work in the grocery store too?
Oh yes, I did. After school, after I got out of high school. No, this was while I was in high school. I did help him in the store.
What were some of the prices of the food that you remember?
Well, I remember eggs were like 10 cents a dozen, and the bread was 3 loaves for a quarter, I believe. And everything was cheap. Beans were a nickel a pound, and you could carry out 6 shopping bags for $1.
Oh my gosh!
You wouldn't believe the things that you could get.
For heaven's sake!
Cheap prices.
But then people didn't make a lot of money.
No, everybody was poor.
The daily wage was, or hourly wage was so small. Did your family deliver groceries?
Not then. My first husband and I delivered groceries after we had the store.
Now, you bought the store from your dad, right?
Right.
When?
When my husband got out of the service in 1945,
Mhm.
we bought it from my dad.
Mhm.
My dad wanted to retire,
Mhm.
and so we bought it.
But you did deliver then.
We delivered,
And then how long did you have the store?
well, up until 1969 when
really?
Oregon Trail Bank bought the building, and we had to close our grocery store so they could have the building.
But you were still delivering groceries up to 1969?
Yes.
I didn't know people ever did that. It's like having a doctor come to your home. That's wonderful.
Oh, we had lots of deliveries every day.
For heaven's sake. Let's go ahead and show a photo of you with your husband. Your wedding photo, isn't it?
Yes, That was in 1942.
1942. And then the war came. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the war?
Yeah, he went to war, and I never did know where he was until he came home.
Really?
2 or 3 years later. And he was in at Kaneohe Bay, which is in Hawaii.
And that's when you joined the Ladies Auxiliary around then, wasn't it?
In 1945, I joined the American Legion Auxiliary, yes,
And they had dances for the soldiers in town, you were telling me?
Well, that was during the war, when my husband was overseas. And there was another girl at the First National Bank who liked to dance, and I liked to dance. And they would call her. I don't know how they ever knew when these troops were coming through Gresham, but they would stay at the fairgrounds where the old armory was, yes.
Oh.
And they would call and say, we're having troops here. We'd like to have a dance. And that's when they got the building for Mr. Hicks up over his store where we danced. And I would call all my girlfriends and everybody I knew, and we'd have all these girls there to dance with these fellows.
Now let's tell our audience what's in that building now.
Amaton Furniture is there now.
So upstairs over Amaton Furniture was the good dance floor.
Oh, it was
I keep
terrific.
hearing about this dance floor from my other guests. I wish I could have seen that.
It was about a half a block long. It was huge, and it was great.
Let's reminisce a little bit about growing up in Gresham. Let's show a picture of what Gresham looked like in 1925, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of the buildings. Now this is Powell, and we're looking north on Main Street.
The building on the corner over here
On the right?
was a Rexall drugstore, and in those days it was a wooden building, 2 stories. And I remember the Japanese Association, or I don't know just what they call themselves, but they used to have meetings up over Dowsett's store, and all of us little kids, we would gather out by the entrance was right over here a little ways, and we would gather out there when we knew they were going to be there, you know, because they always gave us oranges.
Oranges, what a treat.
And that was the biggest thrill of our life, was to be there when they were passing out the oranges.
I suppose, because we're hitting the Depression years is what you're talking about, right? And then across the street over here we have Pancrat's Paint. Tell us the story about Pancrat's.
Well, Mr. Pancrat's had the paint store, and he also had the penny candy store. And he had 2 rows of glass cases, and they were full of penny candy.
But he had penny candy in a paint store. It seems so incongruent.
Oh, that was for the kids. I don't know what he did about the paint. I don't remember that. But I know that we would go in there with the penny, and he would fill a sack clear full of candy for us. He either felt sorry for us or that was the right price for the candy. But we always had penny candy from Mr. Pancrat.
Did he have children of his own?
I don't believe he had any of
maybe
his
that's
own.
why I like to see the kids come in and out.
It could be.
And then just beyond Pancrat's was the grocery store that your father worked
That's
at before
right.
he built the other one. What was that
Right,
one?
that was called the McMar store.
McMar store?
And my dad was the manager.
Let's look at a picture.
The
of,
M&M restaurant happens to be in that particular place now.
Oh, that's really relevant.
That's
right where
he
the
was.
M&M is now. Let's look at a picture of what one of the other stores looked like that would be about the same time. This is the Metzger store, but you told me it was similar to what this store where the M&Ms
Yes, that
would
was
have
similar
looked like.
to my dad's store. They had all of these foods here in these cases were bulk foods. And they had little knobs on them, the doors opened down, you know, and you could just they had scoops, and you filled your own little bag, whatever you wanted. And then he had all of these canned goods arranged across the top like that.
Yeah, everything's stacked up. All the cans are always stacked up.
And they had it stacked up around on the floor. He had and barrels. They had barrels of pickles.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a hard time walking through the aisles. And then I remember one time he had Tillamook cheese. And I think he had a contest along with it. The cheese was the biggest thing I ever saw, and about 3 feet high, and could have been at least that much across. And he had a contest on guessing how much it weighed.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the contest was over, then they started cutting it. And he sold all of that cheese, cutting just piece by piece off of it.
Just cutting away at it. Mm-hmm. Now, the fair came to town starting with, like, 1907. So you remember the fair?
Oh, yes.
And you told me a story about how you got in the fair.
Well, like I said, we didn't have any money, and we always wanted to go to the fair. And we had a friend who lived right next to the fairgrounds, and he had a couple of ladders. And they had a man that rode around on a horse, I believe, and he checked to make sure that nobody was crawling under or over the fence. And this fellow would know just about the right time for us to go. And he put the ladders out, and we'd climb over the ladders, and away we'd go.
Up on one ladder and
down on the
other ladder.
And then he'd take them back and put them in his house.
Oh.
And then we could walk out the gate. You know, they didn't know how we had gotten in.
Oh, that's funny. When I had Dan Murphy on the show a year ago, I asked him if any girls snuck in, and he didn't think any girls ever snuck in. So here was Gertrude Ward sneaking in.
And this wasn't far from his house either.
That's
he
right.
He lived right down by the fairgrounds.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You had a poor experience in which, in 1936, when you had to switch churches. Tell us about what happened to you.
Well, should I tell which church I was going to?
Sure.
Well, our family, we're Baptists, and I was going to the Baptist church, my brother and I, and my parents got a divorce, and it just about broke my heart, but it was one of those things.
That wasn't very common back then.
No, they weren't. It was rare in those days. And everybody talked about us. My brother and I felt just terrible about it, you know. And so we quit going to that church and went over to the evangelical church, which now is Ashley's Restaurant.
Oh.
And
did they have a good youth group there?
They had a very good youth group. It seems like we went swimming out at Blue Lake all the time and out at Sundial Beach. Uh-huh. And we sang in the choir, and it was really a lot better than the other church. But then 4 or 5 years later, my folks got back together again and remarried.
Oh, so it was a happy ending.
It was a happy ending. Mm-hmm.
When you mentioned that you went swimming with the youth group, we have a picture here of an older swimsuit. This is 1918, but you said this was similar.
I think
mine on the left.
I think mine looked just about like that, only it was a little bit shorter.
A little bit shorter.
Yes,
Oh, that's great.
We didn't tie our hair up or anything, but that looks just about like the right swimming suit.
Now, every town has a town character. Tell me about Frank Escobar.
Well, I just remember his beautiful rose bushes that he had all around his house. He had this awful old house.
It was located right about where Musashi Restaurant is now on First Street.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And there was an alleyway right alongside of his house that went right down behind my dad's grocery store. So we had to go by there all the time. And he was awfully friendly, and he was nice.
Mm-hmm.
And but he had these gorgeous roses that I always just wanted to go in and cut all I could. But
the reason that I mentioned that he must have been one of the town characters is that he only worked odd jobs, and yet they say when he passed away, he had over $25,000 cash socked away.
That's what I've heard too, but I don't. He looked like a tramp. He just.
But had a beautiful yard.
He did have.
For heaven's sake. You took music lessons, and we have a picture of the place where you took your first set of music lessons, and it happens to be the Carroll Funeral Home.
Right.
Tell us about your music lessons here.
Well, the people that owned the funeral home then, their names were Gates.
Gates.
And they lived upstairs. All of this was their house. And as you go in the door right here, you had to make a right-hand turn, and then the stairs went up. And, oh, I used to just dread to go to music classes. I was afraid of a funeral home, and the minute you opened the door, you'd run to get upstairs. And I couldn't wait to get out of the place.
Oh, gosh. A little girl, you're just frightened.
Right.
And then you took music lessons at another local place.
Right, over where Christina's
Country Garden
is on Powell, and their name was Cloe, Mrs. Cloe, and she was a music teacher. That I didn't mind going there because there wasn't anything to be afraid of.
You had an episode with smallpox in your family.
Oh, yes. I don't remember just how old I was, but my dad and I, we were had them the worst, and we were in one bedroom in the front of our house, which was a two-story house, and we were upstairs in the front bedroom, and my mother and brother were in the back room, and we had a nurse who was in a bedroom in the back. And we were quarantined for a month.
You had to stay in for a month?
For a whole
no
month.
TV?
We were awfully sick. My dad and I were the sickest, so we were in this one room. And one night, a robber came in, and my dad had taken off his gold watch and laid it on the dresser, and his money. And he was too sick to say anything, and he saw the man taking the things.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was sleeping. I didn't hear a thing.
I suppose nobody locked their doors in those days.
No, we didn't.
Oh, no.
And when the thief left downstairs, my mother had a new fur coat that she'd never had on, never worn. And he took that.
That's a sad story.
I always said I hoped that he ended up with smallpox.
You did some 4-H work, right? When you were in grade school. We have two pictures here of the girls in the 4-H. Tell us the story about your first loaf of bread.
Oh, that was tragic. The first loaf of bread that I ever baked, the dog took it out and buried it.
But you got better, right?
Right. The second loaf that I baked, I got first prize at the county fair. And,
what an improvement.
Right. Well, a lady that lived next door helped me bake the second loaf. And then I baked another loaf to send to the state fair.
Did you win anything at that one?
I don't remember if I did on that one. I know I won first prize at the county fair on this loaf that she helped with.
It sounds like Gresham was a pretty good place to grow up.
Well, I enjoyed it. I always was proud to have been from Gresham, and I wouldn't want to live anyplace else.
Well, Gertie, I have really enjoyed your story so much, and I really appreciate you joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on I Remember When. I'm Gwenda McCall. Good night.